My fellow majors, the giant terrain overhaul for Menace, one of the biggest and best upcoming turn-based tactics titles of the year, has finally arrived, and it really does bring quite a lot to the table, both visually and gameplay-wise. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of all things turn-based tactics, such as the early access patches for Menace, among other things, then a like on this video, a subscription to the channel, and some forgiveness for maybe sounding a little bit sick in this video as I am under the weather would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So yes, as always, we are going to be talking about this next major update for Menace. I will have links to both the explanation of the way the system was changed and the patch notes themselves in the description down below if you want to read them in full for yourself, because we're going to be hitting the broad strokes, the major notes here. How many times we're going to say major in one of these videos? We should really have a running tally at this point. I don't know, but you can find that for yourself while we go through the general info. On its face, this update sounds like it's very much a cosmetic one that makes the game look a lot nicer, but doesn't have a lot to really chew through in terms of hard numbers data for gameplay mechanics. And while that's technically a little bit true, based on the last 10-15 hours that I've put into the update since it came out, I can tell you 100% that there's actually a lot more gameplay impact from this new terrain than you would initially expect, just because of the way it changes up battlefields and introduces a lot of new cover mechanics and the opportunity to stay hidden and the like that was missing on some maps in the game. To say nothing of just how it's a visual overhaul for everything. Like, it looks so much nicer now than it did before, and the game already looked pretty dang nice. The initial post put out by Overhaul that goes into how they decided to change things and why they decided to change things is very jargon heavy, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into it, instead just giving you a little bit of a summary here, which is basically that while they were happy with the way various different types of chunks for terrain features were represented in the game, they weren't represented very realistically. They give one example here of the pond that anyone who is familiar with the game should definitely be familiar with. You've had to navigate around this before, I'm sure. It takes up almost a quarter of certain map types when it shows up. And yeah, it looks like a big pond. However, it didn't really have the features that you would expect a pond to have in reality. As they shout out here, a terrain is a product of its environment. Terrains are shaped by a lot of different factors, such as flowing water, temperature difference, wind, etc. Computing these natural effects is quite expensive and costs a lot of time computing-wise, and since we generate these effects during the game's runtime, a lot of shortcuts had to be taken, the result being that they always looked pretty much just generated and not natural. And I think that's a fair critique to have if you're aiming for a sense of complete realism whenever possible for these top-down, topographical, isometric style maps. However, incorporating these different types of chunks that made maps distinctive into a procedurally generated system to make sure that various different missions and maps still felt unique from each other was proving to be a major problem. The way their new system works is when loading a map, you have a base set of terrain that is generated that is projected down. Sort of like if you're familiar with tabletop gaming, like a game mat that you would put down that has your baseline color scheme, what type of terrain you would expect, like if it's a blasted desert planet, a lot of sand, maybe some cacti, rocks, etc. And then other more finer details, like those chunks that we were talking about that are much more distinct visually, are placed on top of that and then blended in with other terrain features that would make sense around it. Again, going back to the pond, this is where you see things like more mud, reeds, and the like to make it feel like it is an actual pond in a living, breathing world. This way, there's a little bit more of a sense of logic in the way each map is designed, even as procedural generation is taking effect. Again, as Overhype points out here, terrains aren't random. They follow their own rule sets. Water flows, loose debris gets carried with it, and this shapes channels of little rocks as they scrape along the terrain. Something that anyone who has seen heavy rainfall will most likely have seen before if they examine the dirt around them. That type of information, that type of procedural generation is now baked into the way the game makes maps, and it makes for a much more realistic, believable world. Now, I didn't really think this was going to be that major before I booted up the game and actually checked out the update for myself. I read through all of the update information to see what it was they were going to be doing and then went into it. But man, I started up a new campaign on Expert, and I started blasting through it so that I could experience some of the other new gameplay changes that were implemented in the last patch. And yeah, you can definitely see the difference. I mean, there's some screenshots here that Overhype added into the patch notes, and you can very clearly see just how distinctive a change there is here. Beyond just the improvement in visuals, though, this apparently has fixed a lot of the performance issues that some people have been having with Menace. Now, I will say full on, this is not something that I've ever had an issue with myself, because I've always had a very beefy rig compared to what like the minimum specs for Menace are, but I have heard a lot of reports that people have had issues with performance drops, long load times, etc. Now, that is apparently going to be much, much better, as the way this generative system works is a lot less resource intensive and much more efficient in its design, so even people playing on lower end rigs shouldn't have nearly as many issues as they were having before. Of course, all of that comes with user feedback. Again, I have an extremely powerful PC, so I'm not going to have the same experience as a lot of you out there. If you are still having issues after this update, or God forbid they've even gotten worse, do let me know in the comments, and maybe we can get that feedback back to the devs. But with any luck, this should be a big improvement for everybody. As far as actually playing with this terrain it has been a very big improvement. Maps are still recognizable, they still flow in a way that I would expect, but there's just so much more shrubbery and terrain, mountainous hills that I have to navigate that I can use as cover to break line of sight. It feels like a much more varied battlefield, not just visually, but also mechanically. It's a little change, but it's one that has actually helped me feel like certain different types of weapons and different platforms have been much more effective than they would be in the past when things are a lot more open and simple. To highlight that, I've been making very heavy use of 2 of the 3 new squad leaders, the ones that you get for getting reputation with the different planets and factions, you know, the Backbone, Dice of the God, Zane Beecher, who didn't really feel great to use before because their niches felt very limited by the terrain. You know, when you have 2 infantry SLs, one of whom wants to be a tank and kind of get in close to deal maximum damage, and the other of whom is a close quarters stealth specialist, having to deal with large swaths of terrain where they can easily get shot at, and which as a result most favor long-range rifle squads that already have very strong squad leaders in the game, made them feel like they really didn't have a place in the sandbox, especially on expert. Now, though, when there's so much more terrain for them to work with, I've actually been making great use of them equipped with either stealth gear or pirate jet suits and SMGs. So they have a little bit more range than something like a shotgun, but are still able to get in close, undercover, or just move very aggressively with jetpacks, and then lay waste to the enemy without getting shot to pieces just trying to make the approach. I've actually been choosing to take these guys over staples like Griefinger and even Darby just because they bring a different set of skills to the table that are now actually accounted for by the way the game is set up. Again, not a huge change, but something that has made more approaches feel more viable, which has been a major point of feedback during the early access of Menace up to this point. Of course, the terrain changes are not the only thing that were added in this update. One big change that I really enjoy and that I imagine a lot of you are going to enjoy as well is the fact that your stat growth for your squad leaders is now displayed on the mission results screen and in the armory. So, as an example here with Darby, you can see here how all of her stats have changed based on actions that you took during the mission. So how her AP, her accuracy, her discipline and health, crit chance, damage reduction, and defense have all changed, improved, or not changed at all based on how you used her, to give you a better idea of how she's actually progressing and growing and kind of solidify what her role is going to be as you move through the campaign. And this is going to be the same for every single pilot and SL that you have. I love this. It's a nice, neat little UI addition that makes it much easier to have a little bit of an RPG element to the game and let you as a commander build a much stronger strategic understanding of what your squaddies are able to do and how you're best going to be able to apply them going forward, as well as having a better understanding of what actions they're taking are actually impacting their ability to perform in the future. Very good change, very nice, love to see it. We also then have some new 3D models, not just for weapons this time, we'll talk about that in a second, but the new 3D models that we do have are for the anti-material rifle Crocodile. Not sure that I'm going to see this one that much myself, as I still don't really find any use for the Crocodile. If you guys do please let me know. But then also the Mod C MAAL HE rocket launcher has its own 3D sculpt now, and this is one that I do make quite a bit of use of. I do like this one quite a bit. Any sort of launcher has actually been very viable for me, seeing as how there's so many enemy vehicles in the pirate and rogue army factions, especially on experts. So very nice. I'm excited to see this one in game. However, as I said, we don't just have new 3D models for weapons, as the harpies and the blaster bugs for the aliens have new skins, and these are immediately noticeable right off the bat. The blaster bugs in particular really pop against the terrain, and I really appreciate that from a gameplay standpoint because it makes it much easier to have your eye latch onto the fact that they're on the field and not kind of like miss them while you're designating your actions and then suddenly get shot in the face by a big powerful blast. They're bright blue, they're big, they're nasty looking. I really appreciate this design. The Harpies as well is a very nice change because I cannot tell you the number of times that at a glance I've looked at a squad of Harpies and thought it was their lesser variant that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head that doesn't have the giant acid flamethrower breath attack that absolutely devastates infantry squads, only to then have an infantry squad get absolutely devastated because I didn't realize it was the promoted version of the enemy. Now you can actually see what they are. They're bright green, they stand out, and with any luck, my dumbass isn't going to get my guys toasted by not realizing what they were because you can differentiate them by looking at them, which is awesome. Hopefully we see more changes like this for other enemies across all the various different factions as we move towards final release. This is a very awesome change. As far as patch notes and bug fixes, there's not a ton to go over here. It's fairly light, but there's a couple of things to call out nonetheless. One big one is that allied AI will now try to avoid tiles with effects like fire, acid, etc. So, you know, if you're trying to keep civilians alive, you won't have to sit there and bemoan your fate as they run headfirst into fire. Always nice. If you're a fan of the airdropped bunkers OCI upgrade, those weren't providing cover to surrounding tiles. Now they are. A sad sort of nerf for the twin-linked machine gun. It was actually firing twice as many shots as it was supposed to previously. It was firing 60 repetitions. Now it is firing the intended 30. If it was always supposed to be firing that in the first place, then fair enough, but still a little bit of a shame to see. Armor-piercing ammo now works with pistols, which is very good. Nice way to help boost pistols that are fairly niche as it is. And the shotgun accuracy bonus against flying units no longer applies to all equipped weapons. This isn't something that I really ran into before, as usually if I have a shotgun squad, they don't have any other weapons equipped to begin with. But if you were someone who maybe was accidentally getting the benefit of that, you might find that your squads are not quite as accurate across the board against flying units as they used to be. And that's the patch. Again, on its face, it might not sound like a ton until you actually get in and see what the changes actually look like and how they feel from moment-to-moment combat. But I can promise you, with the amount of time I've spent with this patch, it does actually make a very significant change. And even beyond anything just mechanics-based, the game is just prettier now. And that counts for a lot. Maybe even more than tactics gamers are sometimes willing to admit, myself included. Of course, though, I would love to hear your feedback about this patch if you've been playing Menace post its release. How do you feel about it? Do you like the changes? Do you not? Again, are you having issues with performance? Have you seen performance improve even, which would be awesome? And what other changes do you want to see going forward before we get to the full release? I'd love to hear about all of it in the comments down below. As always, I'll be there chatting away with all of y'all. For now, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.